Yo guys, Paunchy here, and today we're going to continue our Octatrack FX series. Today we're going to cover the phaser and the flanger, which are kind of similar to each other, but they have some subtle differences that definitely set them apart. So let's get started. Alright, so the first one we're going to go over is the phaser. So double tap FX, go to phaser. We only have one parameter in the phaser setup here, and it is the num parameter. So basically this one's can be kind of confusing. So ultimately what it says in the manual is it selects the number of stages that should be used. So stages, what does that mean in regards to phaser? What it actually does is it essentially increases the number or decreases the number of peaks in the actual waveform. Ultimately, all you need to know is that it just affects the overall or general sound of the phaser. You don't have to memorize what it says in the manual per se, just know how it affects the sound. We'll move on for now, but we'll come back to that. By default, it is set to 6 stages, so you can either decrease that or increase that. So go ahead and hit yes to select phaser, hit no to get out of there. So we have a few parameters here. This is the sample that I have loaded in right now. And I do have the mix turned up all the way just so we can get the full character of the phaser. Okay, so the first one is center. What that does is selects the center phase of the phase modulation of the phaser. So you can kind of look at that as a pan. So let's hear what it sounds like. It's a bipolar parameter, meaning it can go negative or positive. So So if you take an LFO and modulate that like I was doing there, that can definitely give you some really, really heavy phaser effects. So depth, I always look at that as it kind of sets the intensity of whatever effect you may be using. But in this case, it sets the depth of the phase modulation. So by default, it's in the center, which is a good sweet spot, but basically, if you want a lot of phaser, turn it to the right. You know, the more depth you have, the more you can hear that swooshing or whooshing kind of sound. Basically, turn it left for none of it, and turn it right for all of it. The next one is speed. That one's pretty self-explanatory. It affects the speed of the phasing sound. That's another one that could be really interesting with an LFO. By default, it's set to 32. Now, keep in mind if you set the speeds in multiples of 2, on any Elektron machine like 32, 16, 64, or max, you know, those ensure that it stays in time with the tempo. But essentially any even number will make it so that it's in time with the tempo. So, and of course keep in mind that some of the numbers like 24 or 12, those are more like a triplet kind of thing. FB, that controls the feedback. Now this one's kind of interesting. Originally I looked at that as, you know, I assumed when I first started using it that would be similar to feedback on a delay. However, it's not really. It kind of gives some interesting effects. So I think the best way to show it is just to hear it. So also, this is a bipolar parameter as well. It goes positive or negative. So, but what it says in the manual is it controls the feedback of the original signal thing. I mean, to my ears, you know, I wouldn't necessarily use it all the way to the left or all the way to the right, but it also kind of controls whether it's kind of bright or dark. I find that the more I turn it to the right, the darker it gets, the more to the left, the brighter it gets. So again, best thing to do is just kind of tweak it until you like what you hear. So WID, that stands for width. Now this is a stereo effect, as evidenced by the center parameter as well. So depending on how wide you want it, the more it is to the right, the wider it will be. So and of course, conversely, if you have it at 0, it's basically mono. So, but you know, in my opinion, some of the best qualities of the phaser is the fact that it is a stereo effect. So, but that's, you know, totally up to you. So, and then of course, mix is just how much of the dry signal is mixed with the phased signal. So, if you just want phase signal, I would recommend just leaving it all the way up at 127. But if you want kind of a good balance, you know, put it in the middle, 64, 63. That will give you a good balance of the dry signal with the wet signal. But when you first select the effect, the mix is all the way at 0. So that essentially means you only have dry signal. So if you're not getting any phaser sound at all, then it's probably because your mix is down. So you'll have to turn that up. So, okay, well that's it for the phaser. So let's move on to flanger. So you'll notice flanger doesn't have any setup parameters. So that keeps it a little simpler. So flanger, let's go through the parameters individually. So the first one you have is delay. So that actually applies some delay to the flange signal. So let's hear what it sounds like. Again, by default, your mix is at 0. So if you turn it up, you'll get the flanger sound. So let's mess around with the delay a little bit. So you'll notice, like with most delays, with all delays, if you affect the speed of it, then you actually get kind of a tape sounding effect, or not tape saturation, but like, you know, what happens essentially if you have a turntable and you like slow it down and that kind of thing. That kind of sound. And then the next one is depth. Now going back to the phaser, of course, depth is the same in this case. The more flanger you want, the more depth you need to have. So then of course speed, same as the phaser. So you'll notice the more speed you have, flanger is a little bit more of a pitchy effect. than phaser. It's very similar to phaser, but it affects the pitch a lot more than the phaser. The phaser is essentially something to just give like a sweeping effect, a whooshing effect to a sound, and it can also widen the sound due to the stereo width. But the flanger is more of a pitch modulation kind of thing. Now, in the manual, it does say the main difference between phaser and flanger, well, flanger specifically compared to phaser, is that the notches are evenly spread out in the frequency spectrum. So if you looked at this on an EQ, a visual EQ, then you'd have evenly spaced notches throughout the spectrum. So again, that's not super important. That's more of just a curiosity thing. But of course, what is most important is the sound. Now, feedback, that's also the same as the phaser. So let's turn the speed back down. Basically, with both of those, with the feedback, you can really get some super undesirable effects. So to me, the feedback is better used as a subtle adjustment. So then width, again, is stereo width. And much like the phaser, if you turn the width all the way down, you get a pretty much mono effect. So that'll be it for now. Keep this one a bit shorter than the others. These are certainly a little simpler than some of the effects we've covered already. That'll be it for today. I just want to take 1 second and thank you guys for all your support, for all the subs and the likes, and especially the comments and everything, because I just barely made the 1,000 subs to hit partner. So I have applied for partner, still waiting to hear back, but couldn't have done it without you guys. So I wanted to take the moment to thank you guys and say how much I appreciate all your support. And it's definitely you guys that keeps me going doing this kind of thing. So there will be many, many more videos to come. So hope that helps you guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Leave any comments down below if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.